So last session, we looked at prioritisation matrices. We looked at, once you started to identify all your ideas from your waste walks and from your process maps, how you then start to prioritise those ideas based off how easy is it going to be to implement those ideas that you've got, and what sort of payback is it going to give you. And obviously, the stuff that gives you the quickest payback for the least amount of investment in time and money are the ones that we work on first. And then today is building on that. Once you've identified your quick wins, it's how you go about trialing these ideas. So a big element to lean is experimenting. So you've got a few ideas of what you can do to improve the process. So really the next stage is to experiment with those ideas and try and work out ways of improving the process, and seeing how those trials or those experiments go, and seeing which ones give you the biggest, actually verify and give you the biggest wins. So that's what we're going to talk about today, how we convert these ideas that you've got in your prioritization matrix into actual trials. And those of you have started to do action plans, you've already started to do that. So it's building on those elements. So that's just the outline, review of the theory that we've covered so far. We'll talk about the trials themselves, and I may have mentioned it before. I'm sure I've mentioned it in some of the earlier sessions. We use this thing called Plan, Do, Check, Act, which is called the Deming Cycle, named after a guy called Edward Deming, that's an American mathematician that went out to Japan just after at the end of the Second World War, and he's responsible for rebuilding or helping rebuild the Japanese economy. And Deming developed a lot of the techniques that were adopted in Japan, which became known as the Toyota production system, or Lean. And one of the things he always talks about is Plan, Do, Check, Act. So you come up with a plan of what you want to trial, you do the trial, you check to see the results, and based off what results you're getting, you take action to implement and roll out those ideas, or to revise your trials if it's not quite worked the way you wanted it to work. How to revise your trial and modify it until eventually you get something happy that you want to introduce that's making a difference. So we'll build on that. I've got a step-by-step guide on how to set up a trial, or the Japanese word for it, Kaizen. And this session is effectively part one, and the session we've got in 2 weeks' time is part two. So part one is how you set up the Kaizen, or the trial. And then what we'll cover next week is how you actually go about running the trials themselves, and some of the routines that we use within the trials. And then the last bit is establishing success criteria for the trial. So how are you going to judge whether the trial has been a success or not? So normally what we try to do is we pick a metric, which might be, weight of fruit picked per hour, so kilograms per hour, and we set a target. So the target of the trial would be to increase productivity by 10%. So you're expecting to see a 10% increase on your parts, or your kilograms picked per hour. So that's what we mean by establishing a success criteria. It's really just setting down the targets of what it is that you want to achieve that will say whether the trials either worked or not. So that's a bit of an outline of what we're going to cover. This is how it fits in with everything that we've talked about previously. So these are all the previous courses at the top. Last time was prioritisation. Today is designing the trials. 2 weeks' time is how you actually run those trials. And one of the routines that we use is called problem resolution. So we'll take you through what problem resolution is. Just a bit recap on what we've covered so far. So module one, David covered off the background theory to lean. So we talked about the 5 lean principles. So defining the value, understanding the value stream, eliminating waste so you can increase the flow, sequencing the operation so you deliver it just in time, or pulling it through the operation. And then the last one, perfection, or sometimes it's called continuous improvements, or the Japanese word for it, Kaizen, which is constantly looking for improvements and striving for perfection on the actual process itself. And that's really the element that we're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about today. On this, we've got a reminder of the 7 waste plus 1 that you're all very familiar with now, and is very evident in your waste walks that you've been sending across to me. So you've started to be able to identify the waste within your own processes, and then think about what actions you can do to eliminate those wastes. Module 2, we moved on to process mapping. So mapping through all the steps of the process, looking at the descriptions of all the different elements within the process itself, looking at the distances and the time associated with each element, trying to establish what adds value and what doesn't add value. So what are the things that you do that the customer is willing to pay for, and what are the things that you do that simply add cost to the operation itself? And then the idea behind lean is you eliminate as many of these yellow ones as you possibly can do, the non-value add steps. If you can eliminate them, can you reduce down the amount of time? Or perhaps you can combine 2 activities, so you've got 2 activities happening at the same time in parallel, and the net result should be that you reduce down your overall lead time for the process itself, and therefore get some productivity improvements. Talked about waste walks, string diagrams. So it might well be at the same time as doing your process maps, you actually you draw out diagrams to show the routes taken around the process itself and the distances travelled, and using that to identify where you've got lots of distance travelled or lots of walking backwards and forwards around the process itself, and then basically what you can do to redesign the process to simplify it and to reduce down distance and waste within the process, and therefore improve the overall lead time. Talked about doing an after process maps once you've done the improvements, or in order to predict what the improvements are going to be and what they're going to generate, you might want to do an after process map, so you can actually just go back, remeasure the times for each of the different elements of the process, and then simply recalculate your overall lead time. And the reduction in lead times is your productivity, what you use to calculate your productivity improvements. So that's one way of calculating what the benefits are, or predicting what the benefits are going to be of a particular trial, is to do a before and after process map. That was the before. And then what we worked on and moved on to was producing waste walks. So simply transferring the information from the process map itself, putting it onto those spreadsheet templates that we sent you, where you can record down the description of the items, whether it adds value or not, and the time associated with each of the different step elements. If it's an event that you carry out several times, the number of times you actually carry out that particular event, and therefore the cumulative time. Marking on there the distance, marking on the type of waste that's associated with that particular activity, and then calculating the individual percentages for each of the different elements, and then using that to do a little bit of a Pareto analysis to calculate where the majority of waste is occurring within the process itself. And then basically at the end of it, you get an overall lead time, which is adding up these times here, and then you can start to see what the breakdown is of value add compared to non-value add within the process, which gives you a bit of a feel for how efficient this process is or not. So that's what we moved on to talking through, was waste walks. Then we talked about how you prioritise the waste once you've started to identify it. And normally what I do, you've got yellow is non-value add, pink is value add. So these are the different steps that you've got within the process. Anything that you've identified as waste or a problem you've observed when you've been doing the waste walk itself, I record down on green post-it notes. So a little bit of a description as to what the problem is, what type of waste it might be. And then you've got the orange ones, which are your ideas that you're starting to develop, which will hopefully overcome those wastes and what will help improve the process itself. So we talked about making this visual, so having these process maps up on the wall, so everyone can get involved and they can participate in the process mapping activity. You know, you can have some really good discussions around what adds value, what doesn't add value. You know, what kind of ideas that people have got on how to actually improve the process. So you're really trying to get everybody's input into this stage as to what ideas they've got about how to improve the process or what problems they've observed when they've actually been carrying it out itself. So that's what we talked about, making it very visual. And then we talked about taking the post-it notes onto a flip chart. So I usually get a flip chart, split it up into 4 quadrants, mark up the bottom axis, easy to do, hard to do. Mark up the upper axis, the vertical axis, as low impact on the business, high impact on the business. And then take each of the ideas and then write them out onto a separate post-it note and stick them up onto this flip chart, depending on whether it's easy to do, hard to do, low benefit, high benefit. And the ones that you want to focus in on, and hopefully when you go through this, you get lots of them, are these top left-hand ones, which are the quick wins. So the easy to do, high benefit, they're the ones that you're prioritising, you're focusing on. And then you've got the opposite end of that spectrum. You've got things that are hard to do, they're low benefit, so chances are you'll never get around to doing those things. You know, in most businesses, you never have enough resource to implement every single idea that you've got. So one of the skills of being a lean implementer, a manager of a business, is to actually select out, you know, what are the things that you can focus in on. So this matrix is a way of doing that. And then you've got second priority is your hard to do, high benefits. So that tends to be your longer term type of project, type style work, might require a little bit of investment into new machinery and new pieces of equipment. Therefore, it's got a bit of a lead time associated with it. But once you've got it implemented, it'll actually generate some good wins for the business. And then you've got the final category to discuss is these easy to do but low benefit. I put them in as second equal priority because sometimes doing quite a few of those, it's a good way of boosting everyone's morale and boosting everyone's confidence and giving people a feeling that they're contributing to the improvement of the process. And then off the back of that, you know, hopefully getting a bit more infused and motivated to drive through more changes. So I always classify them as second equal priority to focusing on those elements. So we spent quite a bit of time last time talking through that. Then took you through a step-by-step guide. So we went through and we sent this out as a Word document as well, so you could read through this document and understand how to actually use it for a prioritisation matrix and how to go through that particular exercise. And then what we talked about then is how you can actually transfer that onto a spreadsheet, onto a template, and then that starts to help you in designing your action plans. So just as a summary, really, what we've been doing, the approach and the step-by-step approach we've been taking, we started off with a process map. That led into a waste walk. From the waste walk, we then started to identify the wastes and the issues, and we started to prioritise those wastes and the issues. From that prioritisation matrix, you've got your quick wins, which are the ones that you're focusing on first of all, and then you convert them into an action plan, and they're the kind of things that you trial basically. So you run trials to prove that they actually generate the benefits that you predicted when you were doing your waste walks themselves. And if they don't work, and quite often you find you design things, you come up with ideas, it doesn't always work first time, so it's a question of going back, revising that, and working out why it didn't work, and then thinking through what you can do to actually improve that solution and actually make it work the next time you trial it. And mentioned last time, from your own experience, the reality of the situation is you might have to go through that loop a few times until you get it working the way you want it to work. And then in Subsequent sessions, in some of the further sessions we've got going on, I think it's in module 3 actually, we cover off a thing called activity sampling. So it's a bit of an alternative to waste walk. I tend to use it more when I'm doing detailed analysis of movements of individuals. So we'll show you how to actually carry out an activity sample as well. So that's just an overview, a reminder of what we've covered. Okay, brilliant. So may have touched on this last time. This is that Deming cycle that I talked about at the start. So this was the one that was developed by Edwards Deming. It's based off a concept called scientific management, and essentially what you do is you come up with a plan. So these are the things that you've identified from your prioritization matrix, and normally what you do is you break that down into a series of trials. So usually what you're trying to do with a trial is you're trying to prove out some ideas you've got that will either improve productivity or reduce down giveaway, or reduce down quality issues in the pack house. So you come up with your idea and you work out a way, something that you're going to use to manage and judge the success of the trial. So whether it's kilograms picked per hour, might be the productivity measure, or a percentage of product that's returned from the pack house. So whatever the metric is, you decide at this stage how you're going to measure the trial. The do is you actually run the trial itself. And normally what I do is I do it over a period of time. So I agree to run the trial for a week. I'll compare that to another part of the business that we're not doing the improvement in. So I've got an area where we're doing the trial. So I've got a control measure. And then I've got another area whereby I'm not running a trial in that area. So I can actually compare the two results and see what the difference is. So quite often that's how I'll run the trials itself, which is the do. The check is looking at the results. So however you decided to measure the trial itself, so how are you going to check to see whether it's been a success or not. So mentioned earlier about productivity improvements or reduction in quality. So whatever it is that you've picked, assuming it does work, the act is how do we now convert this to business as usual? So how do we make this now the normal way of working? Or if it's not worked, going back round to your plan again and reassessing what it is that you're trialing. Might be that you've learned something by doing this, and you might want to modify the approach that you've got, and therefore you run the trial again with the modified approach to see if that gives you any different results on the metrics that you've chosen. And this idea of going around this loop, and like I said, you might have to go through it several times until eventually you get running the trial run the way you want it to run, is the theory of continuous improvement. So this is one of the core elements within Lean, one of the core principles. The reason why I do it like this way, as well as doing it as a series of trials, if you came up with an idea on how to improve the operation and you introduced it across the full operation in one go, you run that risk of it not working and you're exposing the business to quite a bit of risk. So the idea of picking out a small area of the business to do this trial just reduces down the overall risk to the operation if it doesn't quite work out the way you want it to work. And hopefully by doing that as well, is it encourages people to come up with fresh ideas and come up with new ways of doing things and not be frightened to trial things because they're effectively doing it in a safe environment. Okay, right, so carrying on with the presentation, talked about how we've got to where we've got to so far with the project. The next stage is running trials. We're setting up trials, is what we're going to cover off specifically today. So often in Lean, you'll hear these trials referred to as Kaizens. That's the Japanese word. Kaizen literally translates as Kai means change, and Zen means for the good. So it's change for the good or change for the better. And it's this idea of running a small improvement project to see whether you can fix a specific problem. So that could be productivity, could be linked to quality. I mentioned about workplace organisation, or sometimes that's called 5S, and that's one of the topics we'll cover off in the next modules as well. It's this idea of a place for everything and everything in its place. So all the equipment, all the tooling, all the materials that you need to do a job are organised around the operation itself. So that could be a Kaizen event, is setting up the workplace. Usually it's a team event, so you get a group of people together to carry out the trial. So you'll have people that are work within the area itself. You might have representatives there from maintenance who can help you do some improvements to the process itself. You know, they might have built you a new workbench for you to trial. It could have the supplier there. So if you've got a supplier that supplies your products, and the trial involves trialing new materials, you could have representatives of suppliers there, and you could have representatives from senior management as well to lend their support to the improvements. Normally the team come together for a period of time and then go back into their everyday operational activities. So it's normally set up as a temporary team to carry out an improvement, and then when they go back into their to the normal day-to-day jobs, they can help spread the knowledge of what they've learned and what's come out of the trial. They can help communicate that to the rest of the operation as well. And it's this idea of bringing a group of people together with a focused activity, of fixing a particular problem, and getting people involved in improving the process. And hopefully by doing that, that improves the morale of the individuals as well. So that's the reasons why we do it. One thing to be mindful of, and I'm always cautious of this, is that there is a negative with running a Kaizen events like this and running these trials, which is when people go back to the normal way of working, the improvements aren't sustained. They just basically slip back to the old ways of doing things. And that's what you're just going to make sure that whatever improvements come out of it, you capture those improvements. You do videos. Dan, you mentioned about doing videos about how to carry out the new process. Writing standard operations which break down a detail of how to do something, a bit like my step-by-step guides to doing waste walks, for example. So you might document the new process as a step-by-step guide aimed at somebody new coming into the business to train that individual up. So you may have to think about how you're going to sustain these improvements, and that's one way of doing it, which is documenting the new way of working. Just some examples of Kaizen events and trials that we've run in horticulture and agriculture. We've talked before, I'm sure, about improving picking productivity. So a trial might be to videotape a picker that's working very quickly and a picker that's working at the lower end of the efficiency rates, and just comparing the two individuals and the mechanism and the methods that they use. So you video them and then you play the videos back alongside each other, and you can start to see what it is about the picker that's working at a much quicker rate. How are they achieving that? And is there anything that we can learn from that to train up other individuals to improve their pick rates as well, especially if they're working at piece rate. If they're working at piece rate, they're going to be very interested about how they can organise themselves and how they can earn more money. So doing those types of Kaizen events, those kind of trials, they can really generate some good ideas about how to improve productivity. Could be down to the layout of operations, so looking about how the operation's organised. If you've got weighing stations in where you're picking fields, where are those weighing stations or those tipping stations in relationship to the actual pick face itself? Could that be improved? Looking at reducing those setup times on machinery. One of the other trials that one of the other groups did was looking at putting down a protective crop, a protective meshing across a crop, which was spinach. So they looked at how they can reduce down the amount of time to do that and speed up that operation. So just some examples of types of Kaizen events, or types of trials that you could potentially run within your business that come out of your action plans. So this is the step-by-step guide, and this is really how to set up a Kaizen event or set up a trial. Mentioned that Kaizen translates as change for the good. Change for the better. That's the literal translation from Japanese. So step one is identifying a time for when you're going to do this. So allocating a week, say for example, for running the new way of working and trialing the ideas and measuring the outputs from that particular trial. It might be that you've got to decide what the focus of the event's going to be. So setting out the objectives and the success criteria for the event. So for example, you want to improve productivity by 10%. So that becomes the objective for the actual trial itself, or to reduce down the amount of distance travelled. Could be another objective that you want to go with. Step 3, decide on where you're going to carry out the trial. So pick a field, pick a part of the business. As I mentioned earlier, you won't want to do a trial across the whole business at once. You might want to pick a small section of it, and that way you're not exposing the whole business to risk. You're doing it in a controlled way. You're learning all your lessons in one part of the business, one part of the operation, before you roll it out across the rest of the operation itself. As I mentioned earlier before, what I'll quite often do is I'll do a trial in one field and do a Kaizen in one field, and then in another field I won't do any changes at all. And that way you can compare the results between the two fields and see what the difference is. And that way you can attribute it to the improvements that you've done. Pick your team, step 4. So decide who needs to be involved. So, do you need suppliers? Do you need somebody from the pack house involved? From dispatch, from maintenance, if you need somebody to come along and do some engineering changes, or a senior manager, if you need authorization to do certain things, you might want to involve the senior manager in the trial itself. So the more people you can involve, the easier it's going to be to get the improvements to become part of business as usual. So the idea of involving people is to get more people to input into the Kaizen event, but also to help you when it comes then to actually implementing these ideas. Step 5, decide how long you're going to run the event for. So run the event for a week, and then go back to the old way of working until you've had a chance to evaluate the trial itself. Or sometimes I've run trials, they've worked really, really well. And we've just left it in place. We've just made it the new way of working straight away. We've got such high level of confidence that we've just carried on running that way. So it's the Kaizen has very quickly moved into the normal way of working. Step 6, make sure you've got the resources available during the event itself. So if you need additional people involved in doing the trial, making sure you secure those individuals for the length of the trial itself. Talking to other team leaders, talking to other managers to release those resources, or if it's some equipment that you need to borrow for the trial, making sure you've got that equipment available, so that it's not going to have any adverse effects on the results of the trial event itself. Step 7, communicate to everybody. So make sure you explain to everybody what it is that you're trying to achieve. So what are the objectives? What do you expect all the individuals to do? Making sure that if they come across any problems as part of the trial itself, those problems get recorded, so they let you know what problems they've come across and they've seen. So I always have a visual management board. So step 8, we talk about having a visual management board. So I have a whiteboard that I position next to the trial, and as people start to identify problems, I get them to write up on the visual management board what problems that they've identified during the operation itself. The other good thing about the visual management board, you can display the results of the trial. So if you want to give people quick feedback on how things are progressing and what the results of the trial are, you can record them on this visual management board, this whiteboard, and you can feed that back to the individuals very, very, very quickly, so that you get instant feedback. Step 9, any other resources that you need. So I mentioned about equipment. It might be that you need specialist materials, chemicals. You might need meeting rooms for the event itself. So it's just working through, doing yourself a shopping list of everything that you need to make the trial a success, and making sure you've got those items in advance. Step 10, you might want to make sure that you've got, mentioned earlier about getting senior management involvement. If nothing else, to stand up at the start of the trial itself and explain reason why the trial is important to the business, and to explain and make sure that everyone's aware that they're providing their support to the actual event itself. And I always used to do all my communications in front of the whiteboard. So the whiteboard itself, this visual management board, not only become a point where you can record the results of the trial, it became a point where you gathered everybody so you could do efficient communications to all the individuals as well. Step 11 was deciding on what the metrics were going to be. So productivity, quality, distance travelled, all those kind of metrics, making sure that everyone's agreed and understands up front how it is that you're going to judge the success of this trial and how you're going to measure to see whether it's going to make a difference. If you've done a waste walk already, you can always go back and repeat the waste walk afterwards and show the difference in distance travelled and time taken, and that could be a criteria for measuring the success of the trial itself. But you need something that's tangible rather than just people thinking it's a good idea. You need something that you can actually point to that says, yeah, this has made a difference to the operation. Step 12, what consumables do you need? So it might be you need marker pens for the whiteboards, post-it notes, flip chart paper for recording down ideas. I used to make sure I ordered in lunch for everybody when I was doing the trials, or tea and biscuits. So, you know, whatever it was to keep those individuals there as part of the Kaizen event, and a little bit of a thank you for people as well for participating in the Kaizen event and the trial. I'd make sure I had all those consumables in up front, so that way we could, again, plan to make sure the trial was as much a success as we possibly could make it. So thinking through in advance, basically, these are all things you do before the trial and the Kaizen event itself, thinking through, you know, what is it that we need in order to make this a success, and making sure you've got it before the event will increase your chances of the trial, the Kaizen event being a success. And then the final step for planning out the Kaizen event is to set the dates of when it's going to happen. So agreeing when those dates are going to, when the Kaizen event's going to take place, and then making sure all the team have got it in the diaries, so they're aware of when the event's going to take place, and making sure everyone's briefed on the dates for the event itself. So these are basically the 13 steps to go through when you're setting up your Kaizen events. These are essentially your steps that you go through in order to maximise the success of the event itself. Just to give you a flavour of visual management board, so this is one I did for a tomato grower. So what we were trying to do, we were trying to reduce down. There was two things we were trying to do. We were trying to improve the productivity at which people were working. So we were trying to improve productivity by 10%. We wanted to do it over a time frame of 3 days. So that was the length of time that we were doing these improvements. So we'd on the whiteboard, we had a printout which showed all the pick rates that people were achieving on this tomato producer. So people were getting instant feedback, so they could see how they were performing as an operation, and what benefits they were starting to get from the improvements themselves. We were also trying to reduce down the amount of waste fruit, so the amount of tomatoes that fell on the floor, because the theory was, or what the concern was, that if you could get the productivity and you could work very, very quickly, but you could do it in such a way that you actually damaged the crop. So what we measured as well at the same time was the quality and the amount of fruit that ended up on the floor. And what we were trying to do was to improve productivity whilst not having a negative impact on the quality and the amount of fruit that was being wasted. So the whiteboard gave us feedback on how we were performing on those two metrics. The other reason for it as well is it mentioned earlier about it motivates people. You know, people understand the reasons why things are being done. That quick feedback hopefully encourages them to come up with more ideas about how to improve the process. So this plan, do, check, act cycle that we talked about at the start, hopefully what it does people start to get a little bit excited about the improvements and start to come back with more ideas about what they can do to improve things. So that's the other reason for doing it. And I mentioned about problem resolution. So the idea being on this side, and this is what we'll take you through next week as well. We had a problem resolution chart, so people could log down any problems that they observed, a bit like your action plan that you started to fill in already. It's basically just a live list of any problems that people had encountered during the trial itself. So any issues they'd come across, we'd write them down on the resolution chart, and we'd make sure we tried to solve as many problems as we possibly could during the Kaizen event itself. And that way people again felt like we were listening to the concerns and we were acting on their concerns that they were actually raising. So this is what we mean by a visual management board. So it's a whiteboard where you record the results of the trial and you feed back to everybody, and you use it to be the central part of all your communications that you're doing around the Kaizen event itself. It's worth trying. It's amazing what you can achieve by using these as a way of providing a focal point on how the operation's going. So quite often what I'll do once we've done the trial, I'll leave the whiteboard in place, and then that way it becomes then a way of measuring the performance of that operation for the rest of the future as well. And like what you were talking about when you're on about those pack lines, and when you've got lines where you've got people waiting, and you may find that people are losing time. If you have it recording the results down on a whiteboard like this, it's a good way of giving people feedback to say, look, we can see the impact of all that waiting time and what it's doing to the overall productivity, and you can have discussions around that as well to make sure that if people are waiting, they understand what it is that they've got to do. So basically, what the thing to think about now with your action plans and with the ideas that you're starting to get. What I used to do is I used to do an improvement action proposal form, which is just basically taking the trials that you've got in mind, what it is that you want to actually implement, and I used to just basically fill in a form. I'll send you a blank template through that shows you what we used to do whenever we were doing any Kaizen events or any trial events, and it basically just details, it just helps you plan it basically. So who's going to be involved, who are the senior management, who are the sponsors for the actual Kaizen event itself, so who's going to be overseeing it from a senior management point of view, what it is that you're proposing to do, where it is that you want to carry out the trial, so what field, what part of the business, why you're doing it, need to improve productivity, for example, need to improve quality, so the reasons why you're doing the trial, the when, so when you're going to do it, so what dates are you going to actually run the trial itself, how long you're going to run it for, the how, so basically, how are you going to set this trial up? Do you need any consumables? Do you need any capital equipment? So it's just going into a little bit more detail around the actions that are involved in the actual trial itself. What you anticipate the costs of implementing these ideas are going to be, and what you predict the benefits to be. So either improvement in productivity or improvements in reducing down quality issues. So just a couple of sentences that predict what the output from the trial will be. And I was always trying to look at, does it improve quality? So I put a tick against that if I was improving quality. Does it improve cost or improve productivity? Or will it improve the delivery of the product itself? So I used to just simply record down a tick against those three elements just to give some indication as to which areas of the business it was going to improve. So basically, what the thing to think about now with your action plans and with the ideas that you're starting to get. What I used to do is I used to do an improvement action proposal form, which is just basically taking the trials that you've got in mind, what it is that you want to actually implement, and I used to just basically fill in a form. I'll send you a blank template through that shows you what we used to do whenever we were doing any Kaizen events or any trial events, and it basically just details, it just helps you plan it basically. So who's going to be involved, who are the senior management, who are the sponsors for the actual Kaizen event itself, so who's going to be overseeing it from a senior management point of view, what it is that you're proposing to do, where it is that you want to carry out the trial, so what field, what part of the business, why you're doing it, need to improve productivity, for example, need to improve quality, so the reasons why you're doing the trial, the when, so when you're going to do it, so what dates, or are you going to actually run the trial itself, how long you're going to run it for, the how, so basically, how are you going to set this trial up? Do you need any consumables? Do you need any capital equipment? So it's just going into a little bit more detail around the actions that are involved in the actual trial itself. What you anticipate the costs of implementing these ideas are going to be, and what you predict the benefits to be. So either improvement in productivity or improvements in reducing down quality issues, or just a couple of sentences that predict what the output from the trial will be. And I was always trying to look at, does it improve quality? So I put a tick against that if I was improving quality. Does it improve cost or improve productivity, or will it improve the delivery of the product itself? So I used to just simply record down a tick against those three elements, just to give some indication as to which areas of the business it was going to improve.